morning, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another broadcast with us here at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. I know we've got a lot of familiar faces today, but if you are new to us, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And today marks my last program of 2022. Between Joe and I think we've done like 160 since September 12th, which is crazy, and over 500 since January 1st of last year. So we love to bring some of the coolest scientists, explorers, conservationists around the globe into classrooms. And I want to say thank you so much for continuing to join us as we showcase these people and stories. It's such a thrill to have this job. This is a very personal note instead of professional. My professional hat is off, but this is the best gig of all time, and I couldn't really be happier than to have you all join us. You guys are such spectacular students and teachers, and it means so much to me every single day. Now, for today's program, my last one, I think it's our second last one. We got a cool penguin one in a couple days with Joe, but for my last one, we're going to one of my very favorite places in the world, and we're literally going there today. We are joined live in Madagascar by Dr. James Herrera. So James is with the Duke Lemur Center. We have done 40 programs at the Duke Lemur Center now, live in their lemur forest in North Carolina, talking about fossil lemurs, talking about the amazing conservation work that they do with their SAVA conservation program. But I'm so excited because today is the first time I've ever had the chance to talk to James live from this just unbelievable, biodiverse, spectacular country that is Madagascar. So I'm going to turn it over to him. I can't wait for your questions in the Q&A at the end. And without further ado, James Herrera, welcome to the broadcast, man.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be back. It's been a while since I've been on exploring, mostly because I've been out here in Madagascar. It's been consuming all of my time. And I want to share a lot of it with you, so let me just dive right in. Hopefully, Jesse, just give me a shout if you can't see my slides now.
You're perfect. You're good to go, man. It's full screen, and let's do this thing.
Great. So as Jesse mentioned, my name is James. I work for the Duke Lemur Center, specifically our conservation program in Madagascar. And I've been here since April, and I'm going to take you on a mini journey with me. And so we're going to compress these last 8 months into about 20 minutes. So hold on tight because we've got a lot of ground to cover. So it all started back in North Carolina. We left from Raleigh and we flew to Paris. And there's just a very brief stopover to sprint between the gates to go from Paris down to Madagascar. Madagascar is this island down off the southeast coast, and we land in the capital city of Antananarivo, the city of thousands. It's a really quickly developing city. As you can see, the landscape is really just packed full of buildings and houses. They've got a brand new stadium that just went up in the last few years. And it can be a very picturesque place to be, but I don't like to spend too much time in the city. So after a few days in the capital, flew up to the northeast to the city of Sambava, which is where the DLC has our conservation program and our headquarters. Sambava is a city on the sea, and it's really an amazing place to live and to work. It's super tropical, and this is just kind of a view of what it's like on the streets. We take these little taxis, like scooter taxis called a bajaj, which can be really convenient. You can always find a ride. And it's on the ocean, so you're never too far away from the sea. Beautiful landscapes to go take a walk or a break. Lovely restaurants just right there on the ocean front. But, again, I'm not much of a city person, so I don't spend a whole lot of time out in the city. As soon as I could, I took off into the mountains where the lush jungles of Marojeji National Park are found. And one of the first activities I had was with one of my very best friends, Tanzana Rabiandansua, doing a field ecology workshop with students from the regional university called CURSA. They were learning about botany, herpetology, which is the study of amphibians and reptiles. We got to see some really cool amphibians and reptiles like this leaf-tailed gecko you're going to see more about. Tons of frogs. I mean, there's 360-something species of frogs in Madagascar, as many as 100 found in places like Marojeji. And just a beautiful, beautiful landscape. The mountains are rugged, and it's, a really important refuge for the biodiversity. The next big activity was to work with a group of students from Duke, as well as other universities, and students from Madagascar. And we went out to the remote countryside outside of Andapa, the villages of Ambudivwara and Antanambe and Budiangeshka. And this is where we can still find a lot of that lush tropical rainforest clinging to these steep mountains. It's the home to not only, the famous lemurs, but also hundreds of species of animals and plants. But of course, the charismatic silky shafaka is one of the gems of this region. It's a type of shafaka, which there's 9 different species, but this species is only found in the Sava region. It's one of the most endangered primates in the world. And so this forest in the Northeast is one of the last refuges. We're protecting the habitat where you can find these species. There's hundreds of species of plants and animals, beautiful butterflies, frogs, of course. The birds are really phenomenal. But there's also amazing people. So there's about 27 million Malagasy people. 80% of them live in the rural, remote countryside. They're mostly farmers living off the land, and they farm a diversity of crops, with arguably one of the most important being rice. If possible, they prefer to have rice breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and so obviously it would make up a really important part of their livelihoods. But people also go to the forest to collect products like wood that they use to build their homes and furniture. They rely heavily on these forested lands to clear the vegetation to grow their crops like bananas and sugarcane. Here, we found traps where people were hunting lemurs with these snare traps. But so that's where the DLC programs come in. We travel out to these remote villages, sometimes 6 hours driving, 4 or 5 hours hiking, to get into the communities and really work closely with them to co-create conservation action strategies. Here, the regional university students alongside the local community forest managers and the students from Duke. We split up into 2 teams. One is studying ecology in the rainforest with Camille here. She's studying lemurs and how the seeds that they disperse in their poop, how they grow much better than seeds that just fall without being spread by lemurs. And so she grows them in these tree nurseries. We also support several Malagasy scientists to study these fantastic lemurs, like Edgar here, who's a teacher at the university, but also doing his PhD. He's studying the silky shafaka. We also have a social science team doing focus groups, town hall meetings, key informant interviews, household surveys, trying to learn more from the community. What are the challenges that they face and the visions they have for their sustainable future? Students from the US and Madagascar are working together to do these interviews, and here Maggie doing the focus groups with different interest groups to learn all about the people and their challenges. Here's Nestorine and her research assistant Angel. They're studying malnutrition in infants and mothers, and trying to teach about nutritious diets to help overcome a lot of these malnutrition problems. We're learning about how important vanilla is to these farmers. About 80% of the world's vanilla comes from Madagascar, and it's a huge part of their livelihoods because it brings a lot of money into the community. But rice is the staple crop for food. They also raise chickens and they do fish farming. And these are all really sustainable alternatives that we can focus on. Home vegetable gardening, which is a source of their food as well as income. So we're doing a lot of workshops with the farmers, teaching and training about improved methods of agriculture, which are called agroecology, mimicking nature and using what nature provides to regenerate these soils, which are so exhausted from years and years of agriculture. So here, the farmers and students working together to create what we call soil food. It's just these brown dried leaves. This is pulp from sugarcane that's been pressed to get the sugar juice. Char and ash from the cooking fire. All these ingredients provide the nutrients that the plants are going to need, and they're free, they're natural, organic. There's all these different green leaves that are loaded with nitrogen, so we don't need all these fertilizers and external inputs. And then we take all that material and put it back into the soil, because these soils have been farmed so often that they really have very little organic material left in them, and that's the basis for the soil food web. Here again, just applying another top dressing of all those nitrogen-rich leaves and ash and char, eggshells from the kitchen, mixing it into the soil to create these really amended, enriched garden beds, covering them with a thick protective layer of mulch so the sun isn't just drying them out, and planting diverse crops, teaching about intercropping and companion plants so people grow lots of different plants in the same space. They make compost using, again, all locally sourced materials. And we always have picnic lunches together where we can enjoy each other's company and also use this as an opportunity to teach about nutritious diets. We do a lot of follow-up evaluations, and it's just amazing to see the farmers and their progress. Here's one family, Miali and Didier, who are, in this small backyard garden. They've got sweet potatoes, tomatoes, corn, beans, taro, sugarcane, grapevines growing on a cassava trellis, ginger, and one thing that I was really excited about that I don't see in too many gardens, aloe. The mother in this household, Miali, she's interested in making organic soaps, and so she's growing the aloe to include in her soap recipes. So all this is with an eye towards trying to protect the rainforest by having benefits that are co-created through this community-based conservation. So after all that hard work over the summer, I needed a break. My partner Laura and I needed a vacation, and we went to the Île Sainte-Marie, which is a small island off the coast of Madagascar that is just a really amazing place to try to get some rest and enjoy these beautiful landscapes, snorkeling in the coral reef. And one of the most famous things in this region are the humpback whales. So whales migrate from the South Pole up into these warm waters in Madagascar to give birth. And so here you're seeing a mother with her offspring that the mother doesn't feed for several months. She just comes up to these warm waters and lactates, providing milk to the infants. And the infants grow up big and strong. They spend a lot of time playing in preparation for the big voyage back down to the South Pole. And it was really just an amazing, incredible experience to be literally surrounded by these huge, powerful animals. We had a lot of up close and personal encounters that were just amazing. I was even on a kayak, maybe less than 100 meters away from a mother and her calf. Not intentionally, they kind of snuck up on me. And I tried to get away as fast as I could, just in case where they decided to do their spinning and twirling while I was kayaking. But it was just so incredible to see these animals. My first time to see whales in the wild. So yeah, just had to enjoy watching these animals play and display. There are also a few lemurs on these islands. They were probably introduced by people, but here's a black and white rough lemur. We found a pair of them that were just kind of hanging out in the trees. This is a really quiet spot, really heavily forested still. And so, yeah, there were just these lemurs hanging out, and you could get pretty close. It was a wonderful time off, and we were really sad to leave the island, but we had another adventure in store with us. We went on a tour with the Duke Alumni Tour, and one of our first stops was a reptile and amphibian park where we got to see snakes and chameleons, got an up close and personal view of how those chameleons catch their dinner. Really cool to see that in action. And it was really just a cool spot before hitting the Andasi Bay National Park, which is famous for the Indri, the largest living lemur. Here, a male gets a little too frisky, thinking he can go and eat before the female could come down. Here, females are dominant in this species. There were also Diademe Shafaka, so that's the second Shafaka species I got to see during this trip. Here's a mother with her infant. At this stage, the infants ride on the mother's back, but they still climb over to the belly when they have to nurse. Really special to be able to see them. This is the giraffe-necked weevil. The males have these really long necks, but females have a short neck. Super cool to just bump into one of these guys in the forest. We visited a few reserves where they have captive lemurs and these forested islands, which was really amazing to see. Here again is that black and white rough lemur displaying what we call suspensory behavior. They hang from their feet a lot. That's the gentle bamboo lemur or gray bamboo lemur. And, it's just so amazing to have these up close and personal experiences with the lemurs. We visited another park called Evoluine in the city of Tamatave, where these white-fronted brown lemurs were confiscated from people keeping them illegally as pets. Here, the female, and they were feeding in that big basket. but the female is a lot smarter. She's going to hang out and wait for the food that falls rather than fight up at the top. They have these radiated tortoises, which is another species that are often kept illegally as pets. Here is the greater bamboo lemur, which, as the name suggests, they eat a lot of bamboo. This is one of the most endangered primates in the world, and at Ivalúine is one of the only captive populations that we have. So it's really important, just in case something really tragic happens to the wild populations. From the city of Tamatave, we flew to one of my favorite places in Madagascar, Fianarantsoa. And on that flight, we were a little bit disheartened to see a lot of forest fires. This is starting to be the season where people are burning the forest to grow their crops. This is October, but between October and December. But there's still a lot of forest. This is the forest of the Rainforests National Park, which, we can really see some beautiful forest. Rainforests is where I did my PhD research, and it's been 10 years since I've been there. It was just so phenomenal to be able to go back and visit this forest and my friends. I got to see my advisor, Pat Wright, and mentor, Benjamin Angiamihaja, a lot of the people I used to work with. We got to see the Milne Edwards shifaka. That's the third shifaka species, and one that's very famous from Rainforests because my advisor, Pat Wright, has been doing research on these lemurs for about 30 years. Keeping up with them in the forest is a real challenge. They just kind of pogo stick through the forest. Of course, we saw more of these amazing leaf-tailed geckos. And we also got to experience some really amazing cultural activities. So this is a traditional dance called the dumbulu. Those are bamboo shafts that the dancers have, and they pound them on the ground, which creates this reverberating drum sound, paired with the women singing, clapping, shaking their maracas. And they sing songs about the history of their communities, about the people, and it was a really, really amazing display. From Fianarantsoa, we then drove down from the rainforest into the dry forest at Ishalu National Park. It's a really stunning landscape as you drive through. You've got these massive granite mountains, but again, kind of depressing at times because, again, people are burning the grasslands at this time of year, because by burning them, that promotes new growth in the grasses for the cattle to graze. But as you see more and more of this frequent burning every single year, a lot of the landscape just doesn't recover, and you see these completely denuded, burnt landscapes until you get within range of the national parks. Ishalu is famous for these sandstone mountains and canyons. It's basically like the Grand Canyon of Madagascar. There are these stunning mountains that it's basically like a badland or a desert on the top. Very, very little rainfall compared to the eastern rainforest. And you just see these little tufts of dried leaves and grasses. But when you get down into the canyons where water could collect, you see these amazing jungles and these cool trees called the pandanus trees that look like they're just straight out of Dr. Seuss. There are these amazing oases, like natural swimming pools, that it was such a relief to jump into these cool waters after hiking for hours through the 100-degree badlands. And it's just so incredible because, out of the middle of these badlands and these seemingly desert-like environments, you've got these lush tropical jungles. And it was just so incredible to see that contrast. Tons of cool insects, like these scale insects. These are two different instars. There's the walking stick insects. This one crossing some super hot rocks, getting from one patch of dried bushes to another. There are these pachypodia, which are like this tank that stores water, and they grow in the little nooks and crannies. The periwinkle, which is actually found to be medicinal, used from chemotherapy drugs. And then I got to see this Varroa shifaka, the fourth species in this talk. The Varroa shifaka are found in these super dry environments, and they adapt very well. And then this is also home to the famous ringtail lemur, and it was baby season. It was just so incredible to be around these big groups of 20, 25 lemurs with 10 or 15 females with their infants. I just couldn't get enough of those baby lemurs. It was really a pleasure. There's also this really cool bird called a hoopoe, which for those of us in North America reminded me a lot of the northern flicker. They'll come down to the ground and pick through the leaf litter to find bugs and ants and the decaying material. So after that trip, went back up to Sambava, and then I had the unique opportunity to go to the Anzanahari Bay Sud Special Reserve. This is the northern limit for the Indri lemur, the one we saw a little bit earlier. In the southern range, where I showed earlier, they're more of this black and white kind of panda bear coloration, but in the northern range, they're almost all black. And it's amazing. I mean, they just pogo stick through the forest using this vertical clinging and leaping. They also seem to have some kind of scent marking behavior. I noticed them doing this a lot, kind of like a cat that rubs its jaws and chin on you and is trying to scent mark you. They do that a lot on the branches. And they were kind of scary looking, to be honest. They were a little bit spooky with that black and that face mask, but also just magical and really incredible to see up close. I had some really personal experiences that were once in a lifetime. During the nocturnal hikes, we would see animals like this. This is the hairy-eared dwarf lemur. Fits in the palm of your hand. Really, really cool, super rare. Here's that leaf-tailed gecko again, which, they're just so amazingly camouflaged. They blend in so well with the lichens and the moss on the trees. And when they want to disappear, they just flatten their skin flush against the branch, and you could walk right by them and not see them. I was there to do a training mission sponsored by the Lemur Conservation Foundation. I was extremely grateful to be able to work with local researchers to teach about studying lemurs. We also got to see lots of cool chameleons just, during our typical daily hikes. While we're looking for lemurs, you actually spot a lot more chameleons. And, it was a really cool experience. Whenever you have these little sunlit areas and waterfalls, you've got butterflies coming to take a drink. They do this behavior called puddling, where they get into these little muddy puddles, and that's where they get their water. But it was also, again, kind of depressing sometimes, because outside of the park, people are doing a lot of mining for precious stones. Here they've dug up all these rice fields and dug up the trees to try to find gold, tourmaline, emeralds, precious stones like that. They'll dig tunnels into the hillside like these, where they can sometimes find a few of these gems, but it's also really dangerous. I heard stories about people that, were unfortunately buried alive in those tunnels that collapsed. And there was a lot of burning. So this is the time of year where farmers will cut and burn the vegetation on the hillsides before they plant their rice. And this is the traditional method that people use, but we're trying to teach new methods. And so here I have the pleasure of taking you to the New Generation School Garden with our environmental education specialist, Everard. He hosts school groups to come. Here's the Sambava High School Environmental Club. They've come out to plant trees and to learn about the value of the environment and how we can restore the environment through activities like planting trees. 40 students came out and planted over 200 trees, just on a Saturday morning. Really great way to spend the weekends, being out there with Everard and all his student groups. We're also working with farmers to teach improved methods of rice agriculture, among other things. So starting with high quality seeds, a lot of people use seeds that they store from last year and they're, just not as high quality. So you've got to start with really good seeds. You've got to plan out these seed beds to make them more productive, to get the seedlings started. We use a lot of compost and systematically creating these seed beds, as opposed to the traditional method that just kind of scatters the seeds. This method also uses far fewer seeds, so it saves a lot of the input that the farmer needs. Whereas the traditional method might use, 15 to 20 kilos of rice, we only used about 2 or 3 kilos. And here's those seed beds just after 2 weeks. They're really, really lush and green. But I got to learn firsthand just how hard it is to work this land by hand. Most people don't have machinery to turn the soil or to spread the compost. So being out there in the, knee deep in the mud was a really new experience for me. Spreading the compost, teaching about how to really gently remove those seedlings from the seed bed so that you don't disturb the roots so much, because those young roots, it's easy to break them and you got to be really careful. And then teaching about how to plant these seeds systematically in rows with very specific spacing to allow the seedlings plenty of room to grow. Traditionally, people will just kind of scatter them randomly and try to pack a lot into a small space. because hoping that they'll get a lot more production. But actually, by spreading them out like this, you give each and every little seedling more room to grow. So it saves a lot of seed stock. The plants are healthier. And this is the progress just after 1 month. You're going to have to check in with us in May to see how we do. Everard is also creating a fish pond to teach about how we can have these sustainable alternatives to wildlife hunting. We just released 200 fish into his fish pond, including a native species that's locally going extinct. It's a great teaching opportunity with the kids and their parents who come out to learn more about all that we're doing. And so just really quickly, I want to thank my team members. I couldn't do any of this by myself, and thank our sponsors who make all this work possible. And I wanted to save enough time for us to have a chat and ask questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to you all.
Oh, James, that was the highest production value, best video from a conservation group I think we've ever had in our history. 3,000 broadcasts, so way to go for that. It looked like a Hollywood film from like 2 seconds in. It's the third time ever. I'll tell you this, it's the third time ever in 7 years of this that as someone was speaking, I donated to their organization. So I know what you guys do. I've been involved for like 5 years now, but it's just such a compelling story. So this is one of my Christmas gifts on behalf of my Oma is now to Duke Lemur Center. So kudos to you for all the incredible stuff you're up to and for introducing pogo sticking as a word into our lives for the way an animal moves.
Thank you, Jesse. That's really generous of you. Really appreciate that. That's above and beyond.
It's a spectacular thing you've got going with SAVA Conservation. And I want to note, I put this in the YouTube chat for everybody too, and I will note these a few more times, but if people want to find out more about the work that you do, and specifically the SAVA Conservation work in Madagascar, do check out the websites below. Some really incredible stories to keep the learning going after that amazing presentation. James, as you said, let's dive in with Q&A. We got a bunch of classes with us live, 6 groups from across the continent, and a whole bunch more on YouTube. If you are on YouTube, please do share in the chat for your questions. James, I want you to know, too, that your dad is watching. So, Joe, really, if he gets any questions in, he gets first dibs. That's the deal. We are going to head to Mr. B's class. Mr. B's joining us today in Benicia, California. So if you guys want to unmute your mic, you're good to go, and take us away.
Can lemurs bite when they're protecting their babies?
They bite?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, they can be kind of ferocious when they're fighting in general, or especially if they're trying to protect their babies. Lemurs can be really ferocious. They've got pretty big fangs on them. Their canine teeth are actually really well suited to fighting. Especially during the mating season, the males do a lot of fighting, but the females are really tough as well. So one reason that they, need to stay in the wild because they're not great domestic animals as pets. They're just way too ferocious.
I'm glad we get that message in. It's important in every conservation program to highlight that. They look cute, not necessarily something you want to be interacting with in the wild or in captivity in any way. Viola Desmond, we're going to head to Milton, Ms. Hearn's class. Come on in and go for it, guys. Hey.
So I have a question. So the question is that why are all the lemurs different? Like, why do they have like only black and white and black?
Yeah. Great question.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into that question. I'll try to keep it brief, but in some cases, it might be that the females really like the males that are really colorful, and we see this a lot in birds as well, because what we see with a lot of lemurs is what we call sexual dichromatism. So the males are a different color from the females, and usually when we see that, that's a result of females being choosy and selecting males that have these really pretty colorations, because that shows that they're healthy and they'll make a good mate. There's other research to suggest that in some cases, like the black and white rough lemur and maybe the black and white injury, it's what we call counter shading. So, for example, it kind of makes when you're looking up into the canopy, and it's kind of just this dappled light where the sun is just kind of filtering through the shade of the canopy. The blacks and the light spots, it kind of just looks like shadows and light. So it might actually be camouflage for some of the lemurs. Yeah. And many reasons we just don't know. There's a lot of research still to do.
Yep. Great question, guys. All right, Miss Evans, I'm joining you in Oregon, and I'm going to take a few YouTube questions before going back to our live crew. Come on in, Miss Evans. Hey.
Hello. Hey, so my feed was blowing up. I'm going to combine one question here into one. It says, what are you trying to learn about the different lemurs, and how do you identify them within species? Like, we've watched several things where they either tag or do things like that to identify them. So they're kind of wanting to know a little bit more about what you're researching with the lemurs.
Okay, we've got a lot of different research projects, each led by different students and colleagues. I mentioned Camille, who's studying the seed dispersal, where she's watching the lemurs eat these fruits and then collecting their feces to pick the seeds out and grow them in the nurseries to prove just how well these lemurs are supporting the regeneration of the forest. Edgar is one of the Malagasy students. He's studying where the silky shafaka is found, what kind of habitat it prefers, and trying to estimate, where throughout the entire distribution, where you can find them, and maybe even how many there are left. There's another student, Tulesi, who's studying the diversity of lemurs. So what about the habitat leads some places to have more species than others? Some habitats you'll find only like 3 or 4 species of lemurs, and in others you'll find 10. So does that have something to do with the quality of the habitat? That's what he's trying to figure out. But yeah, that's just a few of the research projects. And then about how to identify them, we are capturing some of those small nocturnal lemurs, like the hairy-eared dwarf lemur that I showed, the mouse lemur. And when we capture them, we give them little haircuts on their bums and their legs, so we can say, okay, this is left thigh and this is right upper shoulder, so we can identify them like that. For the bigger lemurs, you just kind of have to go on like characteristics of their coloration. Like you might have noticed in one of those injury, it kind of looks like he's got a black mask, or actually I think it was a female, had this black mask, whereas others kind of just have a white mask. Sometimes with the silky shafakas, they've got a big brown patch on their chest and a black patch on their back. Other times they're almost completely white. So you use those kinds of color markings to distinguish them. But it's really hard with these lemurs.
Yeah. I love this question. And James, I highlight this almost every time we do a program together, but you do such an incredible job of sort of passing the buck on to colleagues and highlighting the sort of collaborative nature of science, both in your own lab, internationally, partnerships in Madagascar. I think you've broken your own record today for the most other researchers anyone has ever mentioned in a broadcast. So thank you for that. I think it's really important.
Well, they're really the ones who are keeping the energy going, and I alone couldn't do any of this. I actually don't get to do a lot of my own research. I live through all the collaborators that get to do most of the field research, and I just get to go visit them. And it was a pleasure to have the students from Duke and from the US come, because for some of them it was, a really novel experience. Many of them had already been to Madagascar before. Some of them it was the first time. And so just to have that kind of collegial atmosphere was really great. Everybody sitting around the campfire together, telling stories and getting to know each other, learning Malagasy and English at the same time.
It's spectacular. You answered a question from one of our YouTube classes. I'm going to take a few quick ones from there, and then I'm going to head to Miss McNamara, Shattuck, and Jerusalem Elementary in order. So stay tuned live, folks. So the question was, what language? Justin Herrera, incidentally, in Hatboro, Pennsylvania, wanted to know the main language there in Madagascar.
Yeah, they have their own language. It's called Malagasy. It's a really interesting language. It has some of its origins from Southeast Asia, specifically like Borneo and Indonesia, and some of it from Bantu, which is from Africa. And so it's a really unique mix. It's super difficult, in my opinion, to learn at first, because it's almost the complete opposite of the syntax in a lot of Western languages. And so, it's almost like talking backwards to us. But in a lot of ways, it makes a lot more sense the way they do it. And so it's a really special experience to try to learn and converse with people in their own, native language.
Having been
they also speak French, just to mention that too, because they were previously a French colony. Yeah. So a lot of people speak French as well, especially if they've gone to school. And a lot of people speak English.
It's so Malagasy #1, and I put that up so people can check that out if they're keen to find it. I don't know if this has been your experience or some of your students. I've had the chance to go to Madagascar, and the thing that I found there is better than any other country in the world where we didn't share a language, people can make themselves understood if it's minor things. If you're trying to do a thesis together, it's one thing, but it's really spectacular, the ability to sort of develop that camaraderie and sort of mutual understanding pretty speedily, which is quite nice.
Yeah.
Let's head to YouTube for one more. Miss Newsy's class joining us in Oshawa wants to know if there are any poisonous creatures or dangerous animals that are near you when you're working, James.
That's a really great question. Thank you. Madagascar is a really special place to work for a lot of reasons, but one of them is that there's actually relatively few venomous and terrifying animals. So it's not like being out in continental Africa, where you've got tons of venomous snakes and lions and leopards and things like that, giant elephants and buffalo. Most of the animals are fairly harmless. There is one kind of venomous snake. It's often said that there are no venomous snakes in Madagascar. There's one kind that produces a very mild toxin, and it's a vine snake up in the trees that you'd almost never get bitten by. You'd have to go out of your way to try to get bitten. There is a frog that is almost very, very similar to the poison dart frog from South America, but it's actually its own unique branch of the frog evolutionary tree. And it has the very similar beautiful color markings to warn predators, hey, I'm toxic. There are some venomous spiders, and I've been told that there are spiders that can really do some damage. Luckily, I've never been bitten by one of those. But there are, wasps and centipedes and scorpions and spiders and things you have to watch out for. The biggest thing you have to watch out for sometimes is the cattle. A lot of times people will let their cattle loose into the forest, and especially if you're doing a nocturnal survey and you just stumble on this big giant animal with this big eye shine and they get a little spooked when they're woken up, that can be pretty intimidating. But otherwise, it's pretty safe in Madagascar comparatively.
I want to harp on something ever so briefly here. Can you tell us about Silketra and sort of people avoiding this one plant as they're walking around? Do you have that in the Northeast where you are, or other parts of the country? Like when I went there was a plant that everyone was like, watch out for this bush. And they showed it to us the first day. They're like, don't ever walk into this bush. It's got these little stinging hairs in it. Have you had this experience or not? No.
Yeah, no, there's a handful of those. I don't know the particular one you mentioned, but there are several trees that as you're walking around and you're stumbling and falling in the mud, you reach out for a tree and you're just like, oh my God, I would have rather just fall face first in the mud, because now my hand is full of these spiky hairs and, you can't even wash them out. Or, trees covered in thorns because, they're trying to protect themselves from being eaten and being grabbed by the falling researchers. So, yeah, those you really got to watch out for.
I encourage our students to look up some of the plants of Madagascar because they're so unique. Like the animals, they're just spectacularly biodiverse things going on. It's such an amazing island. Guys, we're at the 37-minute mark. Geez, I'm going to head to Jerusalem Elementary. We've got a student with a placard up for several minutes now. So, Ohio, if you guys want to come in and share a question, Miss Fangstu's class, you're good to
read it.
Hey,
How old can a lemur get?
yes.
Thank you. Lemurs are actually quite unique because for their body size, they live a very long life. So the smallest lemurs, the mouse lemurs, which, they're the size of a mouse usually only lives maybe a year or two in the wild. Mouse lemurs can actually live 5, even 10 years. The research on the wild lemurs is not as thorough, but there's been some really good research to show that they can live up to 10 or even more years. And that's a tiny little animal that fits in the palm of your hand. Then there's the Shafaka lemur, which is among the bigger lemurs, and they can live, I think, 15 to 20 years in the wild. And I think that the captive ones at DLC, they've been known to get up to mid-20s. So they can actually live a very long life. And that's one of the things that makes their conservation so important, is because when the animals have a really long life, they usually don't reproduce very fast. And so it's not like a mouse that they produce litters every single year and they make lots and lots of babies. The Shafaka, for example, they only give birth once every 1 or 2 years. Wow. And, a lot of times the infant doesn't survive. And so it might be 4 years in between births. So they have that long life so that they can have that long time to produce just a few infants.
Yeah. It makes conservation quite challenging with them, unlike some of the smaller species, but they're we always get this one. I need to look up in advance the oldest lemur ever before we do broadcast next time, as we get it every single time we do a program with you. I'm going to head to Carter and Mr. Shadow's class joining us in Chalk River, Ontario, and Miss McNamara. I'll come up to you and wrap it up in a minute. Time flies and you're having fun in these broadcasts, folks. But Mr. Shattuck, you're coming in, guys.
First, to tell you, you know me so well. So well. And my question is, how many types of lemurs are there in the world?
Yeah, how many kinds of lemurs?
Thank you. I should have said that earlier. That's a really great lemur trivia. So the research on lemurs is still ongoing, but we think that there's at least about 100 species of lemurs. Some researchers would argue maybe more like 80 or 90. Other researchers say there's as many as 112. I'm kind of more on the lower side in what the taxonomy and the research that I follow. But yeah, something around 100 species, all packed into that one island that's about the size of Texas.
You've hit upon, so Carter, with that question, you've hit upon the sort of fundamental disagreement of biology between lumpers and splitters, and this is something that we hear from lemurs all the time. Specifically, lemurs. This gets brought up a lot. Penguins. We had a debate the other day. So thank you for stirring the hornet's nest with the question of how many of a mammal group there are. Miss McNamara, I'm going to come to you for one final question. I know we could go all day, folks, and I know we're also at the 40-minute mark. So if you do want to keep learning, the learning going over the holidays, join us next year. Of course, we'll be doing many more programs at the Duke Lemur Center, but check out their website. So much more to explore there, specifically on SAVA conservation. They're really active on social media. They've got the most beautiful eye in the world at the Duke Lemur Center, so you can check her out and more. And I really hope you get that chance when you're done. But we'll wrap up with one final question from Miss McNamara's fourth graders. Welcome in. Come on, guys. Hey.
All right, Azari, can you say your question?
Hey, Azari.
How did the lemurs change their color in the trees and stuff?
Yeah. Do they change their color, James, or do they get old? Do they change as they get older? Do they change during the day? Is there any capacity of them to do that?
There's not too much change like at that level. As some of them do get older, they will develop, like for example, with the silky shafaka, the males, as they get older, they'll start to develop this brown, almost like a stain from the oils they produce on their chest. But for the most part, they have the same color when they're born until they get older. But one of the things that has led to this, overall diversity of lots of different colors is just the variety of different habitat types, species found in different places or different colors. There might be some relationship there. When you go across a river, all of a sudden, they go from being a red-fronted lemur to a white-fronted lemur. And so it's really still a big mystery as to why they have so much color variation. So it's a really great question for you to research when you get older and interested in lemur science.
I like the kids were so keen on that today, and I do hope you take the chance to do it. James, you were kind enough to pass along your email, so for registered classes, I'll let them know your email. You might live to regret that over the holidays, but if you want to inundate James with all your lemur questions, anything about the work that they're doing in Madagascar, in the U.S. and beyond, I really encourage you to reach out. He's a spectacular guide, as we got the chance to see today. I want to note, because half the Duke Lemur Center team is on our YouTube chat, so welcome in Carrie, presumably Megan. We wanted to highlight that the oldest lemur at the Duke Lemur Center is 37 years old. So if you wanted to know, there's your answer, folks. Thank you to the
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, for being involved there. James, I know we could take this all day. Our classes are super excited about the work that you do. I know our classes do have to go to the next period pretty soon. And so as a final question, is there any last message you want to share with kids about how they can learn more, get excited, be involved, help conserve the species in Madagascar? Anything to leave us with to wrap up our day?
Well, I would say this is the perfect age group that you mentioned, between 4th and 8th grade. That's a time when I actually fell in love with primates, and I was really interested. I wanted to be just like Jane Goodall. And after that, for a long time, I just didn't really have a whole lot of role models that were primatologists, people studying lemurs and things like that. So I never really realized it could be a real job. And, it is. And, when you do a lot of research and you study really hard, if you're interested in that kind of thing, you can actually, go to college and study primatology, study anthropology, study biology, and continue on to do research and go to these amazing places. So if that leaves you with anything over the holidays, keep doing your reading, watch all the documentaries you can, get excited about it, and don't forget about it as you get older.
On my Christmas list are Green Planet and Frozen Planet 2 from the BBC, because they're the only series of David Attenborough's I haven't seen, and I can't hardly wait. If you get the chance to see Avatar, great conservation message in that too. And James, this has been, honestly, this could not have been a better wrap up to my 2022 broadcast than this. Everyone check out the Duke Lemur Center's website, social media, and more. And as you well know, James, what we're going to do to wrap up and say farewell is bring in all our classes to say a big thank you and goodbye. So Viola Desmond, Mr. B's class, Miss Evans, Mr. Shaw, thank you for everybody.
Thank you for joining.
Merry Christmas.